Horváth Mihály, Misfit Mediality and Externity, Totalizing Practices in Early Lettrist Experimental Cinema.
I didn't bring a PPT with myself. I'm just gonna read. I am mostly interested in the scandals surrounding early Lettrism. I'm also interested in experimental cinema and multimedial practices, and therefore this will be like the main focus of my presentation right now. And I'm gonna start reading it. So, Lettrism was the creative offspring of Dadaist destruction led by the avant-garde prophet from Romania, Isidore Izu. Rising up in the post-war wasp nest of the cold Carter Saint-Germain-des-Prés, Izu's movement soon became one of the most extreme motors of the Parisian literary scene. Grounded in the totalistic philosophy of the Enlightenment, Lettrism aimed at transforming all aspects of culture and life itself. Exhibiting an all-encompassing dropout modernism, a term I use, Lettrism brought with its eruptive start innumerable contributions to the fields of poetry, the arts, theater, social theory, psychology, and epistemology. Above all its subversive novums, one of Lettrism's greatest contributions was to the field of experimental cinema. The infamous Lettrist cinema, which had a massive and yet rarely addressed impact on countless avant-garde filmmakers and modernist tendencies, not just in Paris, being one of the most notable forefathers of the rogue lettrists Guy Debord's situationism and also the Nouvelle Vague, but even overseas by being a key influence for Steinbrück, for example. The emergence of the Lettrist cinema in the early 50s, which aimed to radicalize outsider youth, fundamentally expanded and altogether superseded the limits of motion picture-based visual culture and has challenged everything that had been previously known as cinema in a span of a couple of years and just a few films. In my presentation, I will be arguing that the political aesthetics of early Lettrist cinema can be summarized by analyzing the two terms misfit mediality and externity. I use the term misfit mediality to signal Lettrism's raté-like dropout multimedial artistic praxis and expanded aesthetic approach. Their works radically transgress the boundaries of all media by experimenting with mutable, in-between subversions of hybrid media handling. Deriving from Izu's later concept of méca-esthétique, which aimed to supersede the traditional categories of aesthetic support by radically expanding the instruments of artistic exploration, Lettrist works argued to integrate all fields of creation and the totality of everyday life into their mixed media works as early as the beginning of the 50s. Extending the boundaries of the branches of art to the entire resources of culture, their eccentric works were drifting between the boundaries of different media they didn't fit into. Lettrist poems could become paintings, paintings could become films, films could be sculptures, which could become mental representations, and so forth. And I quote from Esthétique du Cinéma, "We must first unlearn the classification of the arts and resist reducing them to a precise number, 7 or 8, commonly accepted in the contemporary world. The Cartesian spirit of systematization, which sterilized French thought and art until Romanticism, has continued to play a destructive role in aesthetics. 1,000 possibilities have been eroded or cast into doubt simply because they did not fit within the frameworks of catalog disciplines. By composing the scales of unprecedented expressions, we could return to a novel Middle Ages of aesthetics, a time without restrictions on the number of arts." Lettrists dissolved the boundaries of traditional arts and adopted a proto-intermedial position that transgressed the lines between art and science as well as between every single artistic discipline. Their intermedial approach had limitless transfigurational potential and aimed at shaping a universal human being and paradisiac society through grasping totality with an endlessly mutable artistic toolkit. So in addition to its raw, eccentric, and erratically creative approach of a foreign and strange dilettantism, Misfit Mediality refers to this dis- and interlocational handling of media. This is particularly visible in their cinematic productions. The given creation is never identical to its material manifestation as an artwork. For Lettris, the directly accessible artwork often serves as a signifier pointing away from the artwork itself. This is why localizing a Lettrist motion picture work can be so perplexing. Their cinematic creations lack fixed frameworks. They are oscillating between aesthetic, mechanical, and ambiental dimensions. They remain unfinished, restart repeatedly, or never start at all, and they organically merge with other artistic and scientific fields. Izu's manifesto film Traité de Bavit d'Eternité, which heralded Lettrist cinema and in this sense introduced itself, initially consisted of mainly just the soundtrack. This isn't cinema anymore, it's radio, a reading from an armchair, cried the outraged moviegoers of the fictional Cine Club as Sonika Bo, the expert in children's films, slapped Izu on the occasion of the film's Cannes premiere. Instead of the film, as quoted by DeVoe, instead of the film, the essence was in the crackling, popping sound material recorded on vinyl and later transferred to tape. This unconventional media decision, forecasting media archaeology's technological expropriations outlined by Friedrich Kittler, was what mattered, as I quote, mattered to Izu, as DeVoe quotes Lemaitre. This was why the audience had to arrive to the screening with open ears, as Izu writes it in Cinemonde. It was like it was a text preceding the film with promotional aspects. Nonetheless, the work, and it was quote preamble on film, okay. Nonetheless, the work functions as a text, so the traité functions as a text, or more precisely a manifesto, as we read it or listen to its screenplay, which is further framed as a drama and centers on a sadomasochistic love story. Likewise, the working notes and the unrealized or downright technically unrealizable scenarios of Lemaitre's film Le film est déjà commencé are presented as separate pieces as to his realized cinematography, which is neither film nor theater and was never realized as Lemaitre imagined it. The complete version was never realized at all. The work itself exists between the boundaries of the plans outlined in his working notes, the unrealized scenario published in the film script, and the recut commercial copy, and the film engendered by oral history. So we see an example for these artworks being on the boundaries and the peripheries or different kind of branches of art and medium. This resisting of integration into distinctive media was then further elaborated under Izu's strict editorship by the first generation of Lettrist filmmakers who formed around the journal Yon in 1952, the second era, or what I call the second era of Lettrist film, after Izu's and Lemaitre's breakthrough. The writings of Gilles G. Wollman, Guy Ernest Debord, Marco, and François Dufresne, among else, are certainly the most striking of the examples of the approaches of what I call misfit mediality. Their writings scream of the feverish creativity and media boundary pushing that Izu unleashed on the art of cinema through his praxis, and which introduced a hitherto unthinkable expansion of the art of cinema. Wollman's film, for example, is drifting between the boundaries of abstract cinema, performance art, poetry, and body art with the giant, inescapable, flickering white balloon he released into the salle obscure. Debord's film, as appointed to by Izu, abandoned altogether cinema, just like Film Debat, which instead of a film was a debate on film. And instead, Debord's film was, Uleman en favor de salle, was a political break from the Lettrists. Marco's sadistic film culture is on the boundary of science fiction manifesto plan art and a film sketch, a genre most notably forecasted by László Moholy-Nagy in his A Nagyváros dinamikája, Dynamics of a Metropolis, from 1924 and 1925. And Dufresne's film, in which he created only a soundtrack made up of he created a visual track as well, but it was not realized. But the soundtrack is made up of a series of sung aphorisms, letter poems, and beautiful experiments in never-before-heard sound, which was later presented as a radio program for the blind, as quoted by Deveau, also on the boundaries of radio and film, for example. This abandonment of fixed medial positions and proto-multimedial refusal of integration into artistic disciplines, which called into question an expanded concept of cinema, later found its most significant expression in contemporary Lettrism through Isu's concept of the infinitesimal and the supertemporal arts. This approach was at the heart of the third era of what I would say third era. One could say neo-Lettrist, it depends on the interpretation. The third era of Lettrist cinema, coined with the name of such brilliant artists as Micheline Hachette, François Poyer, Gérard-Philippe Broutin, Alain Satie, Roland Sabatier, and Catherine Caron, Frédéric Deveau, and many others. With their advent, a proto-conceptual cinema was born, often without material works, based on a mixture of boundless performative and speculative elements. First in the form of the infinitesimal, and then in the form of supertemporal works. Based on Isu's essay from 1956, which was later completed in his work, also quoted by earlier presenters, L'art infinitesimal and L'art supertemporal. Based on these, nothing of what had hitherto been known as cinema was preserved. The Lettrist experimental filmmakers spared neither the screen, nor the projector, nor the film strip, nor the mechanic who screens the film, nor anything else. They have completely eliminated the apparatus of film, of which in fact only the spectator remained. They produced countless lived performative film works based on direct bodily participation, and a great deal of work that is purely speculative and accessible only through mental reflection, or in some cases downright unimaginable, existing only in the minds of the spectators or not even there. The film could be a closed film storage box, or a set of mental representations through which the viewer imagined the contexts of the box. The film could be made by the viewer over the course of several afternoons, or it could be just a bag of peanuts or a mouse in a hat that the viewer could pet. It can also be actors kissing and the audience joining in on them, or the audience imagining their own cinema. These works could manifest through mental representations, gallery situations, performative events without descriptions, or collaboratively created occurrences, but most usually on the boundaries of all of these. Lettrist art making, like much of the avant-garde, stemmed from the Wagnerian total art myths, envisioning a conception of art intertwined with life, a unified totality where all arts interconnected and are accessible through one another, forming a seamless whole with life itself. To quote a teacher of mine, Bagi Zsolt, this is a rough translation, this ideal, however, was inherently modernist, rooted in the historical era of Bildung, where culture formed an integrated totality. In this framework, autonomous arts related and reflected upon one another, where reading one classic enabled understanding others, where cultural interconnectedness allowed discussions of works one was indirectly not in the knowledge of through other creations. End quote. Lettrist experimental cinema aims to grab this totality through a medial interconnectedness that instrumentalizes deliberate faultiness, marginal art handling, and also to quote Gergő, poverty of means, poverty of artistic means. Realization of this total art ideal were most compelling when art stepped outside its conventional boundaries, but not onto the periphery of another discipline, as in the case of Misfit Mediality, but outside the realm of artistic production through the instruments of radical iconoclasm, extra-diegetic performativity, and movement politics. I use the term exterity to coin the historical and political movement context of their art making, and expect that I argue cannot be taken separately from their work. This is the scandal part, which I'm a fan of. They're instruments with which they aim to grab a totality by breaking out of the boundaries of art and by directly shaping history through collective action. Lettrists employed extra-diegetic performatives, elements that transcend artistic dimension as a part of their works. And although such elements were not uniformly or not at all treated by them as art, I argue that their external context should be integrated into their interpretation of their creations, much like in the case of contemporary participatory arts. Externity, which I propose to analyze the aesthetic practices of the second term, nonetheless, which I propose to analyze the aesthetic practices of early Lettrist experimental cinema, is derived from Isu's key politico-economical notion externity. The agent of radical transformation in Lettrist social theory was the revolutionary subject of the outsider, and above all outsiders, youth, based on weaponizing the experience of economic, socio-cultural, and political marginality, which is not unrelated to Isu's experience of an emigrant with Jewish origin and an Eastern European background. He has 20 years before the student movements systematized in the image of youth a radical political subject ready to set the world on fire. The early Lettrist works not just embraced the sheer audacity and explosive power of this subject, but became, as I argue, fundamentally inseparable from it. With the uprising of the youth and the dictatorship of the Lettrists, exteriority clashed with dominant culture through a series of scandals and provocations which became embedded in early Lettrist art, or in at least the reception of it, or the hiatus of reception of it. The early Lettrist films were embedded in numerous scandals and provocations surrounding the group's appearance. Exterior elements, artistic or political, came crashing in the salle obscure. Intended or not, above its numerous innovations, early Lettrist experimental cinema was characterized by the arrival of the outsider. Therefore, Lettrist films cannot be, as I argue, cannot be interpreted within the diegesis of the projected images. They rely heavily on extra-diegetic elements, such as the scandal in Cannes preceding the premiere of Isu's Traité de Bave, or the scandal and myth-making surrounding Lemaitre's dethroned Salle Obscure. Isu's work transcends the photograph, embedding the film in a series of provocations, while Lemaitre's interventions open up the salle to the streets. These extensions are inseparable from the movement itself that realized them. The opening of the extra-diegetic does not merely disrupt formal frameworks of the artwork, but propels their art into the realm of political activities. This intersection of art and politics is the central feature of the avant-garde. From futurist seratas to Dadaist surrealist films and events, art was consistently taken beyond to the political. Futurist seratas didn't end with synthetic theater performances, they spilled into the streets, provoking fascistic participation. Similarly, surrealist Dadaist sessions, such as the denunciation of Maurice Barré, extended the critique into the social plane through extra-diegetic performativity, or through exteriority. Isu took this politics of the external, like the mishaps at the Théâtre Michel, where during confrontations, Breton hit Pierre de Massot's arm with his walking stick, and Éluard slapped Tristan Tzara, as quoted by Carté. As a schema for his, he used this as a schema for his own movement. From their first literary interventions at the Théâtre du Vieux Colombier, the Lettrists defined themselves as outsiders, challenging an old order that sought to marginalize them. Their actions blurred the lines between art and politics, setting a foundation for the International Lettriste and later the International Situationniste. These movements emphasized political readings of their actions while continuing the Lettrist commitment to extended externalist treatments of art. Participatory art movements and performance art of later decades inherit this legacy. At their core, these practices aim to directly shape the social space, transcending traditional artistic frameworks. Whether framed as art or as politics, the Lettrists' extra-diegetic performatives sought to reshape everyday life and ultimately humanity itself. In examining the history of Lettrist film, it becomes evident that their works are inseparable from their immediate contexts. The slap Izu received from Sonny Cabot at Cannes, or the interventions of fictional or real police during Lemaitre screenings, are all part of the films themselves. So was Wollman's Lanti concept getting banned, the board split from the Izu's group, and so on. These scandals and the mythologies they generated deliberately blurred the lines between diagésis and reality and extended their works into the realm of the political, where art, life, and the social interaction intervened. Although rooted in Izu's economic theories, which failed to break out from the norms of from a liberal economic perspective, the Lettrist political actions were nonetheless extremely radical. Alongside their publications like La dictature lettriste or Soulèvement de la jeunesse and Izu's Traité d'économie nucléaire, which systematized youth as a radical subject, Lettrists laid the groundwork for later movements such as, for example, Les Enragés of May 68. Their films sought to disrupt not only cinematic norms by the radical redefinition of cinema, but also societal conventions aiming to provoke outrage and controversy by asserting cinema and art not just the power to create and to imagine, but the power to disrupt. Their legacy remains a testament to the enduring relevance of exteriority as a strategy for artistic and political subversion today. Thank you very much.